Okay, talking points, and I can't wait to get Jake's opinion on the news that broke most recently that the Game of Thrones writers, David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, who for the longest time have been allegedly working on a Star Wars trilogy that, like so many Star Wars projects that come and go through various phases, has now been canceled. And for various reasons, whoever side you want to believe, Jake, your reaction to hearing that the two Davids, Benioff and Weiss, who we primarily know from Game of Thrones, are now not going to be playing in the Star Wars sandbox.
Well, my first thought was, because, there was a rumor, what I think a probably pretty substantiated rumor, that the reason that they rushed through the end of Game of Thrones as quickly as they did was that they wanted to get to Star Wars as quickly as possible.
Right,
Had you heard that?
Yes, and I believed it.
I believe it too. And so the fact that we got shortchanged on the back end of one of the greatest shows of all time for nothing,
right? For
no reason whatsoever, it kind of stings a little bit, if I'm being honest.
Sure.
I feel like
I didn't even think about that aspect.
Yeah, that hurts me. I feel like both HBO and Disney, they do something that kind of bothers me, which is they just announce things and then flippantly go, nah, we changed our mind. I mean, HBO has announced like season 2. Like usually HBO's big thing is after the first episode of a series airs, they immediately go, we've greenlit season 2. It did so well, we're going to season 2, baby. And then season 1 doesn't do so well, and they go, it's canceled.
Right.
So, and then this is obviously not the first time that Disney has changed their Star Wars plans, where they've backtracked something or canceled something.
Let's go over a few of those. Obviously, Lord and Miller getting removed from Solo, I think being the biggest one.
Colin
that was mid-production.
I think we're never going to. I don't think we're ever going to see a Rian Johnson Star Wars movie ever again.
Oh, you think that's done too?
I think that's done. And so just like it makes me realize that like you can't really I feel like 85% of these announcements are either testing the water or promotion. But Josh Trank, or they're just using it as promotion.
Well,
so I don't really trust these until. I would say until they start filming, but Lord and Miller have shown that that's not the case. Until the movie is in front of my eyeballs, I don't.
Not even then.
I to quote the great Kevin McCarthy, if it happens.
See, I'm telling you.
I want to say that Ewan McGregor said today or yesterday in interviews for Dr. Sleep that the Obi-Wan Kenobi show that is now going to Disney Plus was going to be a film for a long time. He was under the impression that it was going to be a film. We also Gareth Edwards apparently didn't preside over the reshoots for Rogue One. I think they brought in the guy who did Tony Clayton. I forget that guy. Tony, Michael Clayton, Tony Gilroy. That's right. Almost every major project aside from The Force Awakens and Last Jedi have been tinkered with in some way, shape, or form, including all these ones that they announced. It's almost like DC syndrome also, too. Like DC always announces projects, then they sort of go away. And then to this end, this news sort of just broke, so we really don't know the ins and outs of it. The Game of Thrones prequel, supposed to be a show on HBO that actually had Naomi Watts as the star of it, and nobody really knew what it was going to be. We were very curious to find out when it was going to be set and who it would involve. News breaks right as we're about to record that the HBO is not going forward with that show anymore. So yeah, Jake, that speaks to your problem that you have with HBO and the way that they announce things. My question is that like now, and you say the Rian Johnson thing isn't going to happen, and I honestly believe that there's probably some truth to that because you don't hear any sort of news on it or developments toward it. And then we did hear the announcement that Kevin Feige was shepherding a movie, but we don't know any real details about that, just that Kathy Kennedy announces that he's going to do it. There's no tangible, concrete Star Wars movie in the near future for us to even get excited about. And so, so I asked the question on social media of like, what does the future of Star Wars even look like? And one of our friends, Drew Taylor, got in touch with me, and he's like, "Yeah, you're right. They're never going to make any more Star Wars movies ever again. It's all done." I was like, "All right, I understand that. They're probably going to continue to make it, but isn't it a little bit strange that with this major film franchise that they have nothing on the books that we know of at the very least? Does that not concern you guys in the least bit?"
Well, for me, I'm all right. I'm speaking as somebody who's a fan of Star Wars, but I'm not as big of a fan of Star Wars as Jake.
Sure,
but Jake mentioned something today in our text thread, which, you know, when a Star Wars fan says something like Jake said, which is the idea that Episode 9 is now less exciting compared to The Mandalorian, I find that to be a great example of fatigue. And when Episode 7 hit, when Force Awakens came out, it was genuinely one of the most exciting times I've ever seen about going to the movies. That and even something like Endgame this year. And you don't feel that now. I mean, Episode 8, regardless of what you think about it, it didn't leave a lot open to be excited about into Episode 9. So I guess my point is, there's like so many of these films, and my anchors on the air sometimes say, where does this one exist? Like today I was airing the Mandalorian trailer, and I had to like kind of like break down this is not in the Skywalker saga. It does take place 5 years after Return of the Jedi, but it's not the same storyline. There's no, you know, it's gotten to a point where I don't think average moviegoers are understanding where all this stuff is fitting in. It's confusing. And the idea that Skywalker's coming out in December and ending a Skywalker saga over 9 films, yet the leading 3 characters from the original trilogy are nowhere to be found in this film in the sense of a leading sense. I mean, clearly we think that Luke's going to come back. Carrie Fisher's performances from 7 will be there. I don't know what's going to happen if they'll bring Han Solo back some crazy way. I have no idea. But my point being is that like it is gotten to a point. So when I read a story like D.B, this Game of Thrones creators being taken off of the film, I'm like, I think it's the right move. I mean, I don't know that we need 3 more Star Wars films, 2022, 2024, and 2026. I don't love what they did with the end of Game of Thrones. I think that maybe Kathleen Kennedy took a step back. I don't know. I don't want to speak for her, but when you look at something like Season 8, which did not have the George R.R. Martin writing behind it, and then you see what those guys delivered in Season 8, whether you like it or not, it was definitely not a great season in regards to critical sense of how overall reception from fans. So, and then they say things like this, which really bothers me. In some press conference or some Q&A they did recently, I think it was yesterday, one of them said something to the point of, we don't care about fan reaction. Did you see that quote? It was something about fan reaction doesn't matter to us. I'll find the exact quote, but it was very dismissive of how fans, like, to me, that's the way. Hold on. Let me say something. I think that's the way. I think that's the way a 5th grader responds to someone being critical of their work. Like, to me, it's like they can't accept that Season 8 didn't live up to expectations. And I think by saying, I don't care what fans say, it is a very immature and dismissive way. My point being, though, is that giving these guys a Star Wars trilogy, while they also signed this massive Netflix deal at the same time, just seems weird to me. Like, I don't understand. I know they were given Star Wars prior to Netflix, but why would you take the Netflix deal if you were working on Star Wars? And then some people argue the ending of Season 8 was affected because they were already working on Star Wars. And it's like, these guys don't know. I mean, again, this is all speculation and alleged, but I do find it fascinating that they couldn't focus on one thing or the other. And that to me is a problem.
I will, just to defend what they said about not listening to fan reactions. Kevin, you work in local news, man. Mm-hmm. You and Sean, you understand the dangers of a comment section. If we all changed what we do based on random viewers who get it up within themselves to watch the news and then find our Facebook page and leave a comment telling us what's wrong with our hair or what's wrong with our makeup or what's wrong with the shirt we're wearing.
There's nothing wrong with your hair, sir.
I think that's completely different because they were praised for 6 or 7 seasons, and that season, I mean, listen, I understand it's an opinion, but that season was nowhere near the quality. And I think you as a Game of Thrones fan could agree.
No, and we were saying earlier, like, we were shortchanged because of Star Wars. So to then not get Star Wars, I mean, if we were shortchanged because of Star Wars and then they turned in an amazing Star Wars trilogy, I think it would have made the pill that was Season 8 go down a little easier. Sean.
I want to bring up a bigger problem, which is if these guys pitched a story that was big enough for a trilogy, right? And Kathleen Kennedy and the team at Star Wars believed in whatever the concept was to be strong enough to carry 3 films, then it should be pretty easy for them to keep those 3 films on the calendar and find a filmmaker who can step in and do that story.
Exactly.
We don't know that they're not.
Or did they just, did Benioff and Weiss come to Star Wars and say, we want to make a trilogy? And Star Wars was like, go ahead. Like, did they not have an idea? Is there not a story?
This goes back to the idea of the discussion I think we had a couple weeks ago, and I think Jay can speak to this more. And I don't know the exact details surrounding this, but you go into episode 7, 8, and 9. From what I understand, they did not have a concrete idea of what the full scope of that story was. Am I right or wrong
100%.
on that? Okay, so
No, I think you're right.
Playing to your point, Sean, then yeah, they probably just kind of pitched 3 movies, and they were like,
Yeah.
whatever.
Well,
I mean,
and
you know what I
again,
mean?
I'm going to take the Marvel side because I love Marvel. But when Kevin Feige maps out Phase 4, right, he knows what he wants the Doctor Strange story to be. Or the Black Panther 2 story to be, and he'll work with Coogler and Derrickson, but it's not like he just says to those guys, make Black Panther 2, doesn't care what it's going to be.
In fact,
just
haven't
make it.
we often heard like the Russo brothers say like, oh, we wanted to do this, but then we had to run it by Feige, and Feige either said yes, like thumbs up or thumbs down.
But no one is doing this at Star Wars.
Well, because
it doesn't
also
seem
Feige
like anyone's
has
doing this.
Feige has a long term. Like, not only does he know what the Doctor Strange story 2 is going to be, he knows what it's going to be in relation to something that's going to happen in Phase 5.
Yes.
So he might like the things that he knows. He can say no, don't do that in Doctor Strange 2 because it might mess with something that he knows is going to happen that they don't know is going to happen.
Right.
Yet.
And so my bigger point would be that Star Wars would be in a healthier place if they knew the stories that they wanted to tell.
Why doesn't Kathleen Kennedy know this? Why doesn't she know all this stuff?
Right, so that if those guys up and left, they just said, well, that's fine. There's 1,000 other prominent filmmakers that would love to play in the Star Wars universe, and it can't be Jon Favreau bailing us out every time.
For the love of God, no, it can't.
I'm going to do something I've never done on this podcast before. I'm going to reference T-Pain for a second here. Here's why. So T-Pain recently, this is interesting. T-Pain recently came out with this really cool video where he canceled his tour, and he was told by his team that he needed to tell everyone that he had some type of health issue or a family thing or whatever it was. So he gets on Instagram and he goes, you know what? I'm going to be honest with you guys. My team told me to say this, but I'm just going to let you know ticket sales were terrible. And that's why we're canceling the tour. And I just want to be honest with you about that. I thought that we had more time to plan this. We didn't. And I just want to be honest. I was told to lie to you, but I'm not going to. That being said, what are the chances that because of Seasons 8 critical reception and the fans being upset about it, that they were forced out? No pun intended.
It's possible, but that's pretty funny.
I mean,
that's pretty funny, Kevin.
But in all honesty, what are the chances that the quotes that we're hearing from why they left are not the true story? That maybe, and then this new news story that Deadline just put out about Naomi Watts' prequel not going forward now. This all seems strangely connected to the idea if season 8 was a hit, I know it won Best Drama at the Emmys, whatever. That's because it was the end. But if it was a hit, I don't think we would be having this conversation right now. I really don't.
But if that's the case, and we'll move on after this. If that's the case, then I truly believe, to bring it back to Jake's reference, then that means Kathleen Kennedy is reading the comment section and making decisions based on what she's reading in the comment section. But I mean, in the proverbial sense.
When I ran into Kathleen Kennedy in Chicago at that random throne that was in that AT&T store,
coincidentally,
no, she was there because she was there to wanted to support the guys who created Game of Thrones. Remember, this was the weekend that Game of Thrones was premiering, so she was all in. In that conversation that I had with her briefly about these guys, it just seems weird to me that they signed a massive Netflix deal in between all of this and are somehow leaving this trilogy right. And they weren't even going to direct, right? They were producing and writing this trilogy. This is not a directing job, from what I understand. Am I right about that or wrong about that?
I don't know. That's a good question. I'm not sure.
But double check.
They never said that they were going to direct it.
They directed episodes of Game of Thrones. They directed the biggest episodes, right?
I think they were writing and producing this series. Double check that. My point being, though, is there? Am I reaching here, or do you think there's any possibility? I'm not trying to call anybody a liar. I'm just wondering: is there any chance that we are not being told the full truth here?
Oh, 100% chance. Of course, everybody lies. I wanted to quickly bring up, and then we'll move on really fast. When you say people that the people in charge of these things, that the creatives, that they don't care about feedback, that is the biggest line of shit I've ever heard in my entire life.
Thank you.
They all care. They all
care.
Read it. They all care. And I'll give you one concrete example that I can think of. We were at South by Southwest for Pet Sematary. The movie had its world premiere at South by Southwest, and then we went to an after party. And we're hanging out at the after party, and then I finally I'm going to take off. And you had to go down an elevator from this restaurant where we were to go. And I ended up getting into the elevator with Lorenzo Di Bonaventura, big time producer. He's with his whole team. Yeah. He's one of the producers behind Pet Sematary, and he is losing his mind over the Rotten Tomatoes score because it had 10 fresh and 1 negative. And he's ranting about the 1 negative. Well, what do they say? Oh, it's Variety? No, they never. I remember the Variety review from the last Stephen King adaptation. We were never going to get a fresh from Variety. Who wrote it? What's the byline? We had 9. We were 9 fresh right up until this. And again, very measured. It's not like he was like losing his mind, but it bothered him, the 1 rotten. You know, they were tracking it. His team was saying, "Oh, no, don't worry. It's like it reads, you know, if you read the full review in context, it's not that bad." You know, they point out a couple of things. Well, then why is it rotten on the site? Why'd they pull that one? And I was just sitting there listening to this conversation. They didn't know who I was. I was just hanging out in the corner, listening to them react about the thing. And it cemented what I already always believed, is that they all care. They all care, and they pay attention to that stuff 100%.